Welcome to Year 3 of the Funding Love podcast with Mal and Kate. We are two adoptive moms that seek to love, support, and elevate all corners of the adoption triad while running our nonprofit Funding Love.
In Year 3, we will be talking all about parenting, Disney, adoption, and more with an all-star lineup of incredible guests, both inside and outside the adoption community.
So grab your favorite beverage and pull up a chair,
because everyone has a seat at our table.
Together, we are Funding Love,
the podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to episode 113 of the Funding Love podcast. Of course, I'm Kate, and I'm here with Mal. Mal, good to see you again.
Good to see you always, Caitlin.
Yes, and we have a dear friend of mine on as a guest today. We have Ana Anselma. She is a mom of two brilliant children, Gabby and Nick, and we've known them since they were little kiddos. It's crazy to see them as like adults now. She's also a wife to John, who we also love, and she is the founder and owner of the Social Mind Center down here in South Florida. And we're going to talk more about that today, and I'm excited for you guys to hear about that. But she has been a friend of mine, like I said, for 15 plus years. And I am so grateful for all of the wisdom that she has poured into my life. So I am so pumped that you're all going to get to hear her talk about a topic that we have yet to talk about on the show. And I think it's going to be very helpful to our audience, the topic of autism. So Anna, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, we are too. We are too. We are really excited that you joined us because I feel like autism is something that is becoming more and more talked about. I don't feel like it's something that, is kind of swept under the rug anymore. Like I felt like it was a long time ago. Like when I was a kid, I feel like it just wasn't talked about. And I love that it's coming more to the forefront and that parents are being able to find more resources. And I know that this is something that people that listen to our show, watch our show on YouTube, have experienced. Because a lot of, even though you're not an adoptive mom, a lot of adoptive families are special needs families. So I think this is just going to be really, really great content. And so we're so grateful for you coming and sharing your voice and your story and your experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be good. So I want you to tell our audience, because I know this about you, but why autism? Why is the Social Mind Center and why has this become your passion and your life's work? So tell us about like your journey to this becoming your thing. And I know that involves your kids, so I'd love to hear you tell that story.
Yes. Well, the Social Mind Center has been open now for 12 years. And I started my personal journey with autism with my son when he was 2 years old. He didn't communicate. He didn't speak. He was nonverbal. So we initially thought he was deaf. And then we did all the testing. We tested his hearing, which is usually the first step. The doctors want to check if certain things that are obvious are before they go into, it could be something a little different. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we checked his hearing, and after his hearing, we did developmental testing. And then it's actually a super cool story because that's how I met my business partner. She was the first person to see my son and tell me that, she felt like he was on the autism spectrum based on her experience. And then that's when I heard autism for the first time. And so the Social Mind Center is kind of a compilation of my life's journey with autism and my experience and all the ups and downs that I went through with it. And then after her spending so much time with me and my son, she said, why don't we open the Social Mind Center and focus on social groups? Because at the time, there wasn't anything that focused on that, even though autism is a social communication deficit. That's the most obvious thing you see when you meet an autistic child is their difficulty being able to engage you.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wanted us to try this out. So my center is like an experiment. It was an experiment for my son, and now it's lived 12 years and we're still experimenting, and we're teaching kids how to communicate and socialize and build relationships. And I guess the most important thing we learned about autism is that they need real-time learning
Mm.
which is kind of a big thing today because, we've gone to a lot of virtual. They need that real time. I walk into a room, I meet
Mm.
Caitlin, I look at Caitlin, I got to say hi to her. Now, how do I have a conversation? How do I see Caitlin again? So they kind of need that real life experience. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of that going on nowadays. It's the
Mm.
focus is more on behavior than it is on
Yeah.
equipping them with the skills for social communication.
Mm.
So, and I think now you were right about autism. You hear more about it. It's also because of the statistics. Now it's 1 in 36 children
Mm.
that are being diagnosed with autism. So in the last 5 years, there's been an enormous increase in autism and it continues to rise, right? So
Mhm.
that's why you hear a lot more conversations
Mm.
about it. And it is a lot. It's a big number. 1 in 36 is
Yeah.
a very big number. And then the girls are not quite caught up either because they're not getting diagnosed. They don't really fit the criteria. So right now, so many of them are undiagnosed. So
Mm.
there's a lot evolving. The statistics
Yeah.
are evolving, but there's a lot of knowledge also evolving because we have a lot of autistic people who are doctors now and psychologists. When my kids were younger, that was not as common. Now you have multiple voices in the autism field talking from their personal experience. So that's kind of amazing too, because we've learned a little bit more about autism than we would have without their voices. It changes things a bit.
Right. So
Wow.
do you think with, the numbers like you said of those diagnoses going seems to be higher than before, do you think that's because we're learning more? And since autism, we'll talk about this, but people know that they've heard this term that it's a spectrum. Do you think that because there's or I guess what I'm trying to get at, do you think that the diagnosis is thrown around a little bit too willy-nilly, kind of like ADD? Like I feel I'm just
No,
going to
I
put my
don't. I
opinion
don't
out there.
think
ADD is
so.
just kind of thrown out there as an easy diagnosis, or do you think we're just learning more and then therefore helping people better?
Yeah, I think we're learning more, and I think there's been a lot of changes since the pandemic, and we can't
Ah,
ignore that, right?
got
So,
it.
autism is definitely has a strong genetic component,
Okay.
right? So we know that, and we know that it's from the family history of the dad. So we know a lot about genetics now with autism.
Wow. Okay.
So, I think what did change that kind of stirred things up a little bit was the pandemic, going virtual, not having schools. I think this aggravated things for a lot of kids that might have kind of gone under the radar before, but
Mm.
that kind of rug got pulled from under them. But I do think the diagnostic capabilities are bigger now. They're being done by more schools. Schools know red flags to look for.
I
They
see.
know what they're looking at. Before they were just like, oh, this child just might have behavior issues, but now they know what, oh, this could be autism. And I think more people are educated on the signs. I
Yep.
think they're really pushing for that because early intervention is so important. And when you get early intervention, it really makes a difference in the future of the child. So I think that's why you see definitely more diagnosis and earlier. You see
Yeah, I
earlier.
want you to talk about that because you've talked to me about this before when we just are in conversation as friends about the early intervention and how important that is.
Hmm.
Explain to us why. Tell us why that is.
Okay, so also it's all around developmentally a child. Like when my son started at 2, which now we're seeing that that isn't occurring as often than getting the intervention as early as 2 consistently. There's
Mm.
more of a shift to focus on behavioral issues and not the communication piece.
Mhm.
But early on, the child's brain is still developing and changing. And so it's easier, the younger, the better. Not that older that stop seizes, like their brain seizes. There's
Mhm.
also another period during like 11 and 14 where there's a lot of rewiring in the brain and there's a lot of
Mhm.
growth in the body and brain. But we don't want to put things off till then. We want to kind of tackle it the sooner the better. And when a child is younger, you can see how it's easier one to manipulate them because they're tiny and move them here and move them there and take them here. As they get older, it's harder for them, as you guys know, to get more cooperation because they have their opinions. And
Yeah.
so the younger you can kind of set the tone for them
Mhm.
and set up all the tools and equipping that they need a lot easier with a lot of less pushback.
Yeah.
But also, it's because their brains are like little sponges, and it's easier to get them to learn new concepts. So it is critical to get started, and I do think there's some delay from some parents. I think some parents feel like, oh, he's just developmentally delayed. He just needs to catch up. It'll kind of work itself out on his own.
Mm.
Yeah.
Not really. You don't and also the therapy that they're involved in, it's you could take a stretch and say it's super dynamic tutoring. It's not gonna hurt them. It's not invasive to their body. It's all involves a lot of play and
Yeah.
talking, uh, teaching words. So it's not anything that you're like, your child's gonna be tortured. I mean, there might be a little bit of debate on that with ABA, but maybe we can get that. I always get hesitant to go down the behavioral rabbit hole because there's like a big focus on that, and I wanted to put more emphasis on the social piece because I
Yeah.
feel like that's really not being given the attention that it needs, and social skills are so important for life.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
So true.
yeah, I mean, so the mind of a child with autism, or even I guess just a person with autism, y- is so interesting in the way that they have a worldview. Because
Mhm.
you've shared with me so many times about the things that both of your kids would say. Because Gabby, your oldest, was also diagnosed, but a little bit later, correct?
Well, actually, interesting enough,
Tell me.
she was never diagnosed because
Oh.
she's a girl and
Mm.
she doesn't meet the traditional criteria. So they've never been able to pin it, but she definitely feels like she's neurodivergent. And
Mhm.
now that you mention autism brain, that's like the community's new um, wording for themselves. We're neurodivergent,
Okay.
meaning that their brains are different
Mhm.
from the neurotypical or typical brain, and they call neurotypicals, they don't even use that word, they call them allistic. I looked up how you pronounced it, and it's
Mhm.
allistic. So it's like people that don't have a neurodivergent brain. So to them, it's like, I have a different brain.
Yeah.
Well, my experience is different than yours, and the way that I process the world around me is very different. The information I take out of my experience is different than your information, because I think the autism community wants to make known, like, my experience is not the same as your experience, so I'm
Mm.
going to look and think and act a little different. But if you can meet me halfway, we might be able to learn from each other and learn how we can connect better. And I think that's the main goal in autism, is helping them connect and meeting them, and helping them adapt to
Yeah.
different experiences because their experience is a little different.
Yeah, I mean, you've told me stories and you're just like cracking up telling me stories of like, Gabby being in New York and like just like I do not get these people, just like just like the way that she takes it in and processes it is
Yes.
is so it's so funny. I mean, she's so social and she's got her life in order, so it's not like she's awkward walking around, but it's funny how she's aware that she's viewing it in her way,
Right.
but
It's
also
not as
understands
emotional. Like,
yeah,
one of the
understands how
things
everyone else thinks. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about in college is her generation, right? Because she's 2022,
Mhm.
and her generation is very different than our generation. Every generation is different.
Yeah.
And she's told me, my generation's very emotional.
Yeah.
Everything's about emotions.
Right.
And she's more about the logic.
Mhm.
So it's interesting how she perceives how people feel about certain situations. And she's in science now, so she's studying forensic psychology. So she says that in science, it isn't so much about your feelings,
Yeah.
uh, versus about the science. So it's interesting, but it's about helping neurodivergent people understand our experience and sharing our experience with them, but also allowing them to share their experience so we can learn how they learn and what they think and feel. And I think that is the biggest thing about the autism community. They have a tagline now that says, "Nothing about us without us."
Oh,
Because so many decisions have been made about their lives or their intervention without
Mm.
including them in the process because the assumption has been made that they are unable to make decisions and unable to make choices because their process is so different that they've been forced into situations and to lifestyles that are not of their choosing.
yeah,
So that's why it's so important to invest in communication and social um, interactions because this is how they can connect with us. And if we leave that intervention out, then they're just taught how to behave, but not how to share what they feel and think with us. So it kind of forces them into kind of a very robotic situation, and they
Mhm.
do want to share how they feel and think, even though it's different. I think we can meet halfway. And at least that's what I've learned from my children, both of them. The way they process the world is very different. And it's about having respect for them and saying, "What can I do to help you get
yeah,
what you need to do?" And that's how parents have to look at it, whether your child's 2 or 10 or 8.
Yeah.
How can I help my child connect with me so that my child can help me help them? Because you need their input in that process. It's not a one-way process, it's a two-way process. And I think with autism, what makes it difficult is that they can't always communicate what they think and feel in
yeah,
a way that we understand. So that's why it's so important to focus on communication.
Yeah, I love this, and I feel like it applies to even all parenting. I love the way that you're talking about how it's not about behavior modification. We're not just trying to change your behavior so that you behave a certain way. It's about getting to, like, in parenting, instead of modifying the behavior, you wanna, like, get to the core reason of why those behaviors are happening to help them, like,
Exactly.
problem solve. And I love the layer that you're bringing to it of also, like, learning how they're thinking and how they're processing that to better understand that, because that's why the behaviors are coming out in a certain
Mhm.
way. So it's not behavior modification, it's getting down to the core of it. So I just wanna hear more about your social mind center. So tell us about that, like, what do you do? Who can come? What does that look like?
Okay, so the Social Mind Center, we created it to help to teach, equip children to socialize, to communicate, and to interact with other people, and to give people on the spectrum or neurodivergent people the opportunity to learn how to build relationships and interact. And I think a lot of it has to do with helping them understand how we think, because I
yeah,
think people are so stuck on, you know, they need to behave like this. They need to do this. And it's like, okay, well, this is what we're expecting of you. What are you expecting of us? And what
right,
they're expecting of us is that we explain what the social norms are because they can't read those.
yeah,
So a lot of times they're told, "Oh, you don't know how to behave, or you're not doing the right thing, or you're not saying the right thing." Well, they didn't know that.
Mhm.
So it's and how and I think the way they see those, so this our center is a safe place for kids to come and work on that. And a big component of that is teaching them, okay, this is what the neurotypical world expects of you. Now, how are you going to get that accomplished in a
yeah,
way that does not diminish your needs? And doesn't
Mhm.
discard your needs. Like some of our kids have sensory processing issues like loud
Mhm.
noises, crowded rooms are very difficult for them.
Mhm.
So they need a strategy. Like, I want to go to that party I was invited to, but there's going to be loud music and I don't know how to walk in there and I don't know what to do. So they need a lot of that because there's a big assumption that the autism community or that autistic people don't want to socialize and they don't want to connect and they don't want to make friends. And that's very untrue.
Mhm.
They do, they just have a few humps to jump over
Mhm.
yeah,
before they get to that point, and they got to meet their own needs first and then they can get to that. So our center is like a safe place where it's like a big lab.
yeah,
It's always an experiment because we get new kids coming in and we got to learn about them. And the thing we promote the most is peer-to-peer guidance, like peers giving them feedback and peers
Oh, that's
saying,
so
well,
cool.
this is what I did for me. Maybe it works for you. And so a big part of our work is social groups, so they have that real-time experience, but we also have individual speech and language intervention that starts in preschool all the way to pediatrics, all the way to high school. And
Wow.
then we have counseling and individualized coaching for some of our kids. They need some coaching because some of them have gone through some difficult experiences and traumas that they need somebody to coach them through. They need that rah, okay, we're going to do this together. Let's practice it together. And then we
Yeah.
have psychological testing as well. We diagnose kids. So, and then we have social club. One of our big social clubs is the Lego, our brick club. And it
Yes.
goes from um, early elementary to high school. Our high school attendees are like master builders. And what I've done with them is not just allow them to build for fun, but I teach them working skills, how to work in a group, how to work in a team. They help me with the other kids. Um, Now our older kids group has turned into, okay, what are we doing this summer? Who's getting a job? So I
Yeah.
use that as an opportunity to get them out there in the community and get them having real life experiences, which is always really scary for
Yeah.
parents because they're very afraid of their child being judged or not included. So a lot of parents are very isolated sometimes, because they're just scared of how other people are going to react. So the Brick Club has really become a Wednesday party time. Everybody comes and it's like, we're going to get shown how to do things, but we're also not going to be told how many things we do wrong because they
Yeah.
get a lot of that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
They
I
get,
do feel like hands-on, that Lego building, using your mind, being creative, and then, is so good for kids anyways, but I do feel like the neurodivergent community, is it true that that is, like, such a outlet for them? Almost
oh gosh.
like a
Yes.
therapy for them just to be able to build and use their hands like that? And the fact that you throw it peer to peer, it's like they're learning those skills, not that they're not even aware that they're learning those skills, but they're doing it together, and so
Yes,
Mhm.
that's where
working
the
in a
100%.
social part comes in, yeah.
and having that success because that's something that is hard for them at school,
Mhm.
creating something together with other people and you actually seeing your creation
Yeah,
and they get to have that win-win. They need wins, in order to be confident to move
yeah,
forward and build relationships with other people. They need to know they can do it. So I think that the Brick Club that does that a lot. It allows kids the opportunity to say, "Hey, I'm part of a social club and we talk, we build together, we compare notes on what we love." And and we have a good time at the same time. It's also an outlet for the parents because they can come somewhere where their
yeah,
kids are completely accepted, there's success, they enjoy it. So it's a happy time during the week.
yeah,
And it's been an opportunity for me to learn a lot about neurodivergent thinking because in that environment, they share a
yeah,
lot, because they're relaxed,
yeah,
so they'll just kinda dump out a lot of their thoughts and emotions that we can work on that too, like, "Oh, what are we gonna do with that? How can we help each other?" So, um, it's showing them the wonderful thing about community. We're
yeah.
a community and we're
Mhm.
here to help each other, so this is what it's about. So, because I don't know that they always get that at school.
But
Right.
also just what a positive place, for these kids to go, like you said, to feel safe and to feel seen and to feel understood and to then also take those skills out into the world and become successful. Now you said that, like, it's a safe place for parents too. Do you have anything for parents as,
Yes,
like
we
a
do.
support group for them to, I don't know if it's a support group, if that's even the term, but a place for them to feel like
Well,
they're gonna be equipped?
most parents do want coaching. They
Yeah,
want parenting, they want help, and they will ask for individual I do individual coaching and we have our waiting area is always a family. We have a family room and that family room is always like conversation time.
yeah,
What Brick Club allowed to do was it has parents that are not my clients.
I
They're
see.
not my clients, so they can come in. Anyone can come and participate in Brick Club. And sometimes they decide to become my client, but sometimes they just want to be part of the community. So we
Yep.
open that up, and they can ask me questions, or sometimes they ask me for private sessions. They want guidance on some parenting, some decisions they need to make. So that's provided here. What's cool is that a lot of the parents here have been on the journey for a while, and they're extremely welcoming to,
That's cool.
I can help you. So those were unforeseen consequences that I never planned in my community and have evolved
That's so
as a
good.
result of that. And a lot of my families here are friends outside of here. They
Mhm.
help each other, because it takes a village, right?
Sure.
So I
Absolutely.
feel like here we're always trying to connect people with other people. So also because parents feel alone sometimes.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
is anyone going through what I'm going through? Oh my gosh, there's
Sure.
tons of people going through it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when we first started, it was autism, but now we have a lot of families with ADHD that are dealing with that. We have a lot of families that have anxiety issues.
Okay.
Mm.
Um, we have selective mutism, which is another, you know, challenge that has evolved out of anxiety where kids are not talking at all.
Oh
You
man.
know, so it's, I feel like there's a growing need,
Yep.
constantly, for families to have support that isn't so focused on correction all the time, you
Mhm.
Mhm.
know, because I do think kids get tapped out of that too.
Of
They're like,
course. Of course. Yeah,
they're
that's
always being told you did this wrong, you didn't do it right, you need to replace it. And
mm,
so,
yeah,
yeah, it's, I love the Brick Club, and I really feel like we get to practice extra some of
that's
the
cool.
things we talk about. And because it's somewhat structured, but not really. You
Right.
kinda get they get the opportunity to be part of an environment that's a little bit more loose. Like, some of my kids will switch groups in the middle of the building. Like, they're like, "Okay, I'm done with this project, I'm gonna move on to so and so's group, because I
Yep.
wanna work on that project," and that's kinda cool because that's something that can happen at work, or
Right.
college, um,
Mhm.
so it's an ongoing experiment, so I'm
Yeah.
learning as I go along a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so we are an adoption podcast. That's what we primarily are, right? And so a lot of our listeners are adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents, and in the adoption process, there's a lot of unexpected.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of information that you as the adoptive parent will get about the biology of the birth dad or the birth mom, or even when it
Absolutely.
comes to like the foster care system. If you're adopting through the foster care system, or even have a foster child that you don't know much about until they're in your home, and you're like, I want to be able to help them, and then you learn maybe of a diagnosis or of autism, or you think maybe that this child is undiagnosed with autism, and just the weight of all of that feels like a lot because it's adoption's
Yeah,
hard, and then
absolutely.
the unexpected. So what would you say to like lift them up and encourage them in that, or even just like a few words of guidance for those parents who might feel like, oh gosh, this might be too much, I don't really even know what to do or start or say, that just
Mhm.
it's a lot.
Here's something I think is so important, because I have parents come to me all the time thinking something's wrong with their child.
Ah, that
And I
happens,
think
yeah.
development, I think all kids develop differently, and I'm sure you girls will agree that when you adopt a child, there may be some factors that go into that because of the transition that they've been through. So their
Mhm.
developmental track may not be like some other
For
child's
sure.
developmental track. And I think that's a good thing to just take with you, whether you see some signs, is that every child develops differently. And some
Yeah.
children, I think that's been my biggest takeaway from being part of this process. I've seen a lot of kids that just needed a lot more time than that other child to get some things accomplished. And I think that's really hard because as a parent, especially as a new parent, you're adopting a child, um, you have expectations,
Mhm.
and we live kind of in a really hurried world, right? Where we
Mhm.
Yes.
want
No
everything to
doubt.
happen like
Yes.
at the size of a text. And
And
if
then the
they could,
comparison factor too of like, well, this child
yes,
further like just it's that constant
yes.
comparison.
Mhm.
And so if they could just take a step back and give their child some room, because the one thing that I will say is that change is very hard for children. And somehow we've dismissed that from society.
Yeah.
Like, we
Mhm.
just expect them to adapt to all the things that are being thrown at them. And I think some kids need a lot more time to adapt to a change.
Yeah.
That's usually my first question to a lot of parents that come in here. They'll say, I think my child has autism, or I think my child is delayed. I'll say, okay, can you tell me what's been going on in your lives right now?
Yeah.
So if somebody were to say to me, "Well, I just adopted this child and I adopted them at 2." I'm like, "Oh, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back and let's just give them more time to get adjusted to their new home, to their new mom, to their
Right.
new schedule." This can take months,
Sure.
Mhm.
months and months and months. And for some child, it may take more than a year. I've seen that. I've
Mhm.
seen our kids here like blossom,
Yeah.
and some of them just needed more time. Not that they didn't need help, but just getting that into your mind, I need more time and I need to take a step back. And
Yeah.
even just cutting yourself some slack as a parent,
Mhm.
you've been through a change too. You're just adopting a child. I mean, this is a major change for you.
Yeah.
So, are you going to have all your ducks in a row? No. I mean, do you even know what the ducks need to be?
No.
I think we're kind of brutal on ourselves a lot. Like, I
Well,
tell
and
that to
that's a
parents.
good point that you bring up because as a, adoptive parent, you just feel like you wanna, like, fall right into place, like, you want it to
Yeah.
be smooth, and you're like, "Why is this not working?" And then so that expectation you have in yourself can very easily be put right onto your child without
Mm.
realizing it, and
Mhm.
so that pressure then is not, like you said, giving them the space and the room and the time to acclimate and to just feel it out and to be, I guess, learn the new environment, learn the new
Right.
space, learn the new everything.
Right,
That's so
right, and
good.
I think kids need that space, and I see that now overall in our culture.
Mhm.
Everything is like, if you're in kindergarten, they're already talking about 2nd grade or 1st grade, like, "Okay,
Unbelievable.
next year
It's
you need to be
stressful.
here." If you're in 3rd grade, they need to be in 5th grade. So, that's, like, so not developmentally appropriate and not
No.
aligned with development, like, and
No.
every kid develops differently. So, now they have all the reading levels, like, your kid has to be at this reading level, and my question is always, "Why? Why do they
Gosh,
have
such a
to
good
be there?"
question.
You
Right.
Yeah.
know? Some kids don't walk till later, some kids walk early, and it's hard for parents because it's what Caitlin was just saying, the comparison point. Well,
Yep.
that kid's walking, and that kid's talking, and that kid's doing this and this, and if they
Yep.
could just take a step back and go, "Okay, my child has just been through a very big change, an
Mhm.
adoption." My family too, so we're not
Mhm.
gonna quite have the trajectory
Yeah.
that some of these other families are gonna have, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So, overall, just the diagnosis of autism, um, for a family that maybe has a young child or and they have just been given the diagnosis of that, that can feel like a lot and a little scary, a little bit unknown. And I just want to tell like our audience and our viewers and our listeners that I have just admired you, Anna, the way you have navigated this with your children because it has been, at least from a point of view as your friend, you've been so grace-filled in this that you've viewed this as a joy and your something special, something unique, something really cool that your kids are. The way that they think different is cool. The way that they're going about something is so cool. And I just want and you've told me before that you've had parents come in this place of like, gosh, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. This is, is my kid ever going to be normal? And you've told me like, it's going to be okay. They're going to be okay. And your child's amazing and they can live a normal life. And I think that you've given so much energy to this and so much time to your children to be able to blossom, but it's because you've I mean, I guess want you to encourage those parents and saying like, "Listen, it's gonna be okay. Your kids are cool. Your kids are awesome," in that new diagnosis.
And everybody has their normal.
Right.
I always ask parents that when they say they want normal, I say, "Well, what does normal mean to you?" Because
Yeah.
normal is a very varied word these days,
That's
like,
true.
your normal is not my normal. So, I think when they get we delve into that, they're like, "Oh, okay." What, because you can have goals and aspirations as a parent, that's
Yeah.
okay. And your child may acquire those goals and aspirations. It just may look a little different for you.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so you need to
Mhm.
keep your mind open. It may not look like it looks for your friends.
Yeah.
I know that's been the case for me.
Yeah.
My kids definitely, um, their brain is not my brain.
Yeah.
So I always ask them, "What are you thinking?"
Yeah.
Because what
Right.
they're thinking is not what I'm thinking. So we get off on that. Then we meet halfway. They tell me what they're thinking, and then I can adjust because I'd like to say that as parents, sometimes we're the ones that need to adapt and adjust because their brain is different and you can't swap out a different brain.
Right.
Their brain is
Mhm.
different. So you're going to have to see if you can adjust a little bit so they can meet you halfway,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yes, I think it's important for parents listening to also know that taking them to the social mind center or finding a program that can help them, it's not about like, here's my kid, here's the cookie cutter, can you help them to fit in there?
Right.
Let's make them, it's not
That
really
is
about
so
that. It's about
important.
embracing who
Mhm.
they are and helping them to live their best life with that. Not like, okay, well, here's the cookie cutter, now get in there.
And
This is
that's so important you said that because if you're an adoptive mom, you're going to get to know your child and you should never, ever, ever, ever question your thoughts and your feelings as a parent. And when you're looking for a provider or somebody to help you on your journey, you have to make sure that they respect your perspective because your perspective counts. I
Mm.
have parents tell me all the time, well, I feel that what's happening is this. Okay, well, let's explore that, right? If you're going to see somebody that cancels out completely your opinion, doesn't want to hear it, that's a red flag
mm,
because
So
as a
good.
parent you need to have input in what anything that happens with your child looks like, and
Yeah.
if you're not comfortable with it, then maybe it's not a place that will work for your family,
Yeah.
mhm,
right?
Yeah, and I do like the y like you said, if you're in an area that has a place like Social Mind Center or you're in South Florida and you have a child going there, it's not about dropping them off and saying, "Fix my kid," like you're saying, Mal. Like,
mhm.
there's nothing to really fix. It's a guiding, right? Right, Anna, if
Mhm.
I'm
It's
correct,
equipping, it's
it's a yeah,
equipping.
equipping, that's a good
Equipping.
word. Yeah, that's a good word to use because it's not like your child's not broken. Like, that's one thing that, like, the diagnosis, like, "Oh my gosh, my kid's autistic," and I think knowing having friends and of course, kids who are my friends who have kids who are growing older who you're like, "Oh man, I wish they could be honest with themselves that their child likely
Mm,
is on the spectrum," and you watch this child struggle and you watch these parents have a hard time being okay that that could be a diagnosis, and so
mhm,
then the whole family is seeming to be a little bit in disorder, and you wish you could say like, "Oh my gosh, it's so okay." Like, let them learn to get the tools that are gonna equip them so that this isn't a problem. So, the early intervention, I think, is something that you've always said to me, Anna, like, so many times. Like, if you have a concern or even a question, just go have a conversation with somebody, and
And it's just a
it's
conversation. I
just a
tell that to
conversation.
parents.
Yeah.
Parents come here all the time and they're like, "Well, I think I need to process this." As you should, as you should. You
Mm,
shouldn't feel like you need to jump into anything. You need to
yeah.
figure it out. And you need to interview the place
Right.
that's gonna be helping you with your child, and you need to make sure that their values and their philosophy aligns with yours
mm,
because it's a family community thing. The family
So
has to
good.
be involved, and if you're not comfortable with these people, well, that's not gonna be work and they need to treat you with respect just like they need to treat your child with respect and make sure that it's in their interest
Yeah.
priority to learn about your child and how your child navigates the world and their process because every child's process is different and they're just not slapping a label on them and one
Right.
size fits all. And in fact, it's great that you guys say that because there is no one size fits all in autism. Every
Mm,
single autistic person is extremely unique. And I think that that brings about the challenges in intervention. They want to kind of do one size fits all.
yeah.
So that makes it challenging. So it's very important that the parent is very connected to, "This is what I think is going on with my child and
Yeah.
what my child looks like," you know?
Gosh. Well, listen, this has
yeah.
been such great conversation. But before we wrap up, I want to know, is there any like closing thoughts, anything that you would love to offer to a family or anything to say about this topic before we wrap up?
I love, the autism community, how they're advocating for themselves, and I love how they feel that it's, you know, nothing about us without us. And I think as
That's
parents,
cool.
all parents, autism or not, we can learn a lot from that tagline because we need to include our children in our process and we need to involve them in our process as a family so that they learn to be a participating member of our family.
Mm.
So
Good.
that's any family, right? So want to include your child, nothing about them without them. Like, I
Yeah.
was thinking of putting you in soccer. What do you think about that? And you have the ultimate decision making power
Sure.
because, you're wiser and older than your child, but you might be amazed at their feedback,
Yeah.
so include them in your process so that you can learn more about them and what they think and feel, which I think is very important.
That's just such a good
Great
point in
advice.
general.
Yes.
Yeah, for like
Love it.
overall, the whole idea of being a family team. Mel, I know that's like a huge
Yes.
term that you guys use in your house too. It's just being a family team and doing it together,
Mm.
regardless of whether there's, an autism diagnosis or not. It's just including your kids in that. And
Yep.
that's so cool. I
Yes.
love that you wrapped up saying that. But Anna, this has been so great.
This was so fun.
We're literally I haven't seen you in too long, and it's like we're just miles apart. So,
I know. But
after
you're
this, I'm gonna
busy
text you.
raising 2 babies, so,
I know
it's
they're
busy.
great, but they want to see you. And so after this, after we hit stop recording, I'm gonna text you, and we're gonna schedule a coffee. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds really good.
So this has been great, and I know our listeners are going to get something from this. And yeah, I mean, this is awesome. Mal, any closing words from you?
No, it's been so helpful for me, and I'm already thinking my wheels are turning, and
Yeah.
I think this was a great episode, and I really really appreciate you sharing your voice on us. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very
Awesome.
welcome. It was a
Awesome. Well,
pleasure.
thank you to Anna and listeners for tuning into this episode of the Funding Love Podcast. We will see y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Funding Love Podcast. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, which means that people like you can help make a lasting impact in the lives of adoptive families and birth moms. At Funding Love, we create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people. And when you partner with us, whether that is giving online, signing up to become a monthly donor, or simply buying merchandise from our shop, you are funding love.